Hey everybody, welcome back. Music Corner, as always, host, broken air conditioner here, about to be the sweatiest music reviewer on YouTube. And I'm already absolutely pumped because I just watched Ja Morant single-handedly defeat the Minnesota Timberwolves' epic performance. But the name of this channel is not Basketball Corner. It is Music Corner, and that is the subject, as usual, because it is May. At least, when this video comes out, it will be May. And as the ancients hath foretold, that means that it is time to recap all of the, or most of the, big, important, noticeable releases over the last 2 months. As usual, we are splitting this into some records that disappointed me, some popular and talked about records, and then the best stuff I heard in the last 2 months. And thankfully, this is like the shortest disappointment section that I've ever done. The biggest disappointment, definitely, is the new Wallows album, Tell Me That It's Over, which is exactly what I wanted to hear while listening to it. Yeah, I thought this band's debut was okay. I was kind of into it, but I was really surprised to see how much commercial appeal had followed the band and how much coverage they were getting for this sophomore album. That had me really curious going into Coachella if this thing was going to do numbers and if it was going to be any good, and it didn't really, and it wasn't really. If I can say one thing for this project, it is that some of the instrumentals are pretty bold and loud and intense, more so than a lot of the other indie pop rocky pastiche that their contemporaries are making. But God, so many of these songs are just so trite, so painful, that I found this thing a pretty difficult record to get through. Also landing in this section, unfortunately, is the new Pup album. I still really enjoy this band. I'm excited to see them at Shaky Knees. When you're watching this, I've already seen them, and they were great. Plus, I've liked every Pup record up to this one more than the previous one, and when I was reading about the concept and listening to some of the singles before the record came out, I was really, really excited for it because I thought it was something that they could just really do well. And while the concept is still here and it's funny and I like the way they execute it, so many of the songs, a good chunk of the songs on the record, just completely failed to translate with me. I am not sure exactly what it was about this album, and you know, Pup is very talented. I'm sure that I will like their next record more, but I would consider this a letdown given the start that they got off to with the singles and my expectations for the record. And that's pretty much it. Now we can just get right into some of the biggest releases of the last 2 months, starting with what I really believed was going to be one of the biggest albums the last 2 months, the new Camila Cabello record, which I was moderately excited about, and I might be the only music critic on earth willing to say that, because Camila has kind of become a punching bag for both poptimists and whoever in the critical underground might accidentally hear any of her songs. But as a matter of fact, she is an absolutely fine, average, capable pop star. There are a number of songs on this record that she really outdid some of her contemporaries on. It certainly has its highlights. I know that it is really easy for people to just hate on whatever Camila does, but once again, for the third time in her career, I think that she's released an album that is at least decent. Speaking of decent, that's all I can really say for this new Tears for Fears album as well. After enjoying a couple of the singles, I was pretty excited for this thing, though my expectations were measured because obviously you're talking about a band deep, deep into their career. It's not exactly a creative high point for many acts, and yeah, this is a little bit more akin to their 90s stuff than their 80s stuff in terms of quality. But they did still manage to really impress me on a few moments here, and the fans seem to have received this thing really well, even some tracks that I was not at all crazy about. So maybe they're doing something right. If you passed up on this album because you didn't think you'd listen to a Tears for Fears record in 2022, maybe give it a shot because it's probably better than you're imagining. Charli XCX, Crash. I knew. As soon as I heard Good Ones at H&M that this was going to be a difficult record to talk about. In the grander scheme of pop music, Charli still stands above a lot of her contemporaries. No, I do not anticipate this to be one of the best pop records of the year. In fact, I can already say that it isn't. But the fact of the matter is, this is just average coming from an artist who has always been so much more than average, particularly in the extremely creative hot streak she has been on now, going all the way back to like Pop 2. This is definitely her weakest release in a while, her least creative and interesting release in a while, but like I said, because this is an artist of Charli XCX's caliber, it's still solid. There are still some good tracks on this thing that I enjoy, and even when she is going plain plastic radio pop music, she does it better than most. So from a turn to the poppy and accessible to a turn for the absolutely insane, unpredictable, brash, wild Jack White with Fear of the Dawn. This record is absolutely insane. It is wild, it is unpredictable, it is versatile. I think it's okay. I think it's pretty consistent. I was surprised by how many of the experiments clicked with me. The only thing that has really held me back from falling as in love with this record as I am with other Jack White solo albums is that the duds, the worst song on here, are some of the worst of Jack White's entire career. So yeah, I don't think I'll be revisiting this record in full that often just because there are moments that annoy me so badly, but generally speaking, it's still so cool to see Jack White at this point in his career continuing to innovate, take his sound in new directions, do generally cool stuff. I talked about Lotto in my last bitching about the Hot 100 video. Since then, her album has come out and it is solid. I like this thing. I like it more than I anticipated. The singles have grown on me or stuck with me quite a bit. There are some satisfying deep cuts here. Like many records in this lane, there are some features and some songs that are just dead on arrival, seemingly from lack of effort, but the rest of the track list really has a lot going for it, and I can see Lotto sticking around. I think this is an impressive first step into the mainstream after the success that Big Energy has had over the last 6 months or so. And Orville Peck with Bronco. I was pretty excited for this record because I liked some of the EPs and like short selections of songs from the album that had been released ahead of time. Turns out there's a reason for that. The front half of this record is loaded with great tracks. It is much more spare on the second half. The level of quality tends to go down, but I still enjoy the unique formula and what some would call a gimmick, but what I would call instant recognizability as Orville Peck as a performer. And I think if you've had much interest ever in his music, this is definitely worth taking a look at because there are a number of really, really enjoyable songs in the mix. I also have to shout out King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard for their new album, which a lot of people are enjoying, a lot of fans are really enjoying, and I can kind of see why. There are a lot of highlights here, and they dive into a lot of older styles that I think people have been wanting to come back for quite a while. But ultimately, this thing is length personified, and if you are going to try and sit down and listen to all 80 minutes of this, you are going to have to put up with some absolutely wankerous noodling on some of the weaker tracks here. So while I can pick out 10 to 12 songs that would make an amazing King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard record, there are still, a handful more songs in the mix. Also, Sailor Wave 3, the surprise drop that knocked me on my ass during an already busy week. But yeah, I was really excited to crack this thing open. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of the first Sailor Wave album, and I enjoyed this. I thought it was good. It wasn't great. It's short and a little bit inconsistent, but the high points are exactly that thrilling, nocturnal, neon bliss that you've come to expect from the series, and I think fans should be pretty satisfied with this. Speaking of pretty satisfied, Denzel Curry came through with a solid record that I would say is satisfying. I didn't love this thing. I think the high-end best songs of the bunch are still just okay in Denzel's grander catalog. There's no Black Balloons or Clout Cobain in the mix here. I wouldn't even say there's like a ULT or Speedboat, but he does execute pretty consistently. There are not a whole ton of duds, though. There are a handful of huge misses, songs that I really can't believe even made it onto the record, but there's enough material here to balance it out, and Denzel's baseline level of talent shines through more than it doesn't. And Vince Staples with Ramona Park Broke My Heart, also a slightly inconsistent record, though a shorter one, and one whose low points are not nearly as low. I actually came away from this thing pretty satisfied after the last Vince Staples project we had heard from. I think this is a step in the right direction. I think there's a lot of good songwriting, a lot of what makes Vince so charming, such a standout performer in the world of contemporary hip-hop to be found on here. It is not his best or most consistent material, but I did enjoy it. The new K-Tempest album had quietly become something I was really anticipating, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. I thought the deep cuts, for the most part, were not nearly on par with some of the best singles, and while I think the record is able to translate a lot through both its dreariest and most upbeat tracks, I will say sometimes the optimism that it's teaching fails to shine through some of the drearier and stiffer instrumentals on the album. I also feel pretty good, but not incredible, about the new Destroyer record, one that I was highly anticipating after a couple of singles I really enjoyed, and yeah, it is solid. It doesn't really touch the best Destroyer records of the bunch, but in the field of contemporary indie, I have to throw my hands up and say that this thing is pretty good. I enjoyed more of it than I didn't, and it doesn't have a whole ton of big misses on it. I seem to like the new Earth Gang album more than a lot of people did. I haven't seen a whole ton of really positive buzz for this thing, but I enjoyed this record a lot. Some of the singles that I wasn't crazy about at first really went on to warm up on me, and there are some absolutely killer deep tracks in the mix. I think this is a step forward from their debut, and it shows the creativity and immense potential that they have going forward. Seriously, I still think that the track Strong Friends is one of the best things I've heard all year. Its combination of flow and delivery and thematic context, which works in with the instrumentation, is just absolutely wonderful. I also really enjoyed this new Weather Station album, which I think will come as a surprise to a lot of people because I wasn't crazy about the last Weather Station album, which was the most acclaimed of the project's entire history. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite thing that she's ever done. It is all the way stripped back to just mostly pianos, acoustic guitar, and her own voice, and the songwriting really shines through. She's a great vocalist in these very isolating moments, and I just found myself enjoying more of these songs than I had ever on a Weather Station project before. And while we're on the subject of weather, I'd love to shout out this new Weather Glow EP, this Weather Day meets Asian Glow collaborative project. I really enjoyed it. I love how raw it is. I love how abrasive it is, and yet it is beautiful. It reminds me a lot of the previous Weather Day record, Come In, which I'm obviously a huge fan of, and I think that anybody who loves that lo-fi internet core kind of stuff should absolutely be checking this out. I think you'll really enjoy it. Kilo Kish is back with her best full-length project yet, and while I was kind of hoping she would lean a bit more heavily into the retro video game concept that this thing sets up on its opening and closing tracks, it really doesn't need to. The songs work really well on their own. There are a ton of bangers in the mix here, and they're very futuristic, hard-hitting, vivid electronica. I am really impressed with the huge change of pace that Kilo Kish has undergone since her last record, which started on the great Redux EP that I loved and has continued onto this record, which I also really enjoy. And finally, the new Ginny Hval record, Classic Objects, is a highlight. It may not be as good as her last couple of records. I think it's more on par with her Lost Girls releases. It is honestly just yet another example of why Ginny is such a compelling lyricist and songwriter, while also being this extremely gentle but very emotive and unique vocalist. I think that in the world of chamber music and singer-songwriter music, she continues to set herself apart from her contemporaries, and another pretty good record in that line will only further do so. Now for the best of the best, I heard 5 great albums that really separated themselves from the rest of the pile in the last 2 months, starting with Duster, who surprise released their new album. Once again, blindsided by a surprise release that I would have been extremely excited about had I known ahead of time. And yeah, this thing is murky, it is heavy, it is dark, it is nostalgic, it is everything that you could want a Duster record to be, and while stylistically it's a little bit more all over the place than most of their records, I find that most of the places they journey to, they succeed while there. I also really enjoy this new Father John Misty record, even though there's been plenty of skeptics. I gotta say, the conceptual nature of the record and the consistent sonic decadence, the throwback to this lovely old Hollywood retro era that Father John Misty is indulging in, does a lot for these already very clever, very engaging, and very catchy songs. I just gotta throw my hands up and say that at this point, I will not be doubting Josh anytime soon, because whatever idea he has, it's probably gonna be pretty good. Next up, an artist I would never doubt, King Push, Virginia Beach's own Terrence Thornton. I hope Pusha T doesn't have me murdered for joking about his name, because I really do think that he's, like, amazing. And yeah, this new record isn't necessarily Daytona or anything, but it is damn good, honestly. Aside from the really enjoyable Jay-Z feature on Neck and Wrist, I think you can throw out most of the other artists who appear on this song, save for Malice and Labyrinth on the really epic closing track. What I'm trying to say is, if you're a hip-hop head and you immediately went to go listen to the 2 Kanye songs and the Kid Cudi song, they're like the worst of the bunch on this record, and I seriously recommend you give the Pusha T solo songs a shot, because they hit it out of the park more often than not, and working with Kanye and Pharrell as producers clearly paid off. There are some amazing beats on this record, and Pusha T just does more with those really, really great instrumentals than most rappers are capable of, and I'm still so enamored with his sound, his lethality in his writing and vocals. I am just obsessed. And continuing with that lethality, and continuing with some coke raps, I really enjoyed the new Conway the Machine album. I thought it was his best project yet. It seems like so long ago, but it was just in 2020 when I reviewed all of those Griselda records, and I said Conway really needed to step up because he didn't have an album as good as these West Side and Benny the Butcher albums. But he really showed me, because last year he dropped La Maquina, which I really enjoyed, and this new record is even better. The beats are great, most of the features are pretty good, and Conway is just getting more raw and more personal as the years go by, and it is making everything he does so much more high impact. I just, for once, finally can't see anyone other than Conway being able to make a record like this, being able to do it in this way. Some of the tracks where he talks about his past, he talks about getting shot, he talks about his place in hip-hop, all of that stuff is commonplace for rappers to get into, but Conway does it in a really unique and really compelling way. And if you like hip-hop, coke raps, underground hip-hop, any kind of more stylistically reserved but thematically intense rap music, this has got to be one of your favorite releases of the year so far. And finally, one of my favorite releases of the year so far, an album that I gave a really positive review to, and it still has not left my brain in all that time, Rosalia with Motomami. I was so hyped for this thing. I loved the singles, and I thought this was like the peak of Rosalia's exposure up to this point. So if she dropped a record that really hit it out of the park, it was going to be great and amazing. And while this thing didn't sell what I expected it to, God, it's even better than I was hoping for. She just has such a compelling ability to assemble these tracks that can, in one moment, feel so angelic, feel so heavenly and blissful, and then turn a corner into this experimental, sexy, brash, and uncompromising sound and style. The genres that she works into this thing, the versatility she shows off with her performances as both a singer and a rapper, it is just awesome. It kicks ass, and while not every song on the record is made equally, there are certainly a handful of the best tracks I've heard all year, both bangers and ballads to be found on this record. So while it may challenge people who are not native Spanish speakers like me trying to understand the nuance in a lot of this songwriting, I still think it is absolutely worth a listen, worth your time, because it is amazing. It's one of the best records I've heard in this year so far, and I think it is setting up Rosalia for a really long run of commercial success in the future. And that is it. Finito for this time around. Thank you for watching. Link in the whatever for everything else that I do. Reviews on the blog. I'm starting a kind of new project that might be linked in the description if you wanted to check that stuff out. And the next video on this channel will also be something kind of new that I have never done before, but we're going to give it a test run, and if it sucks, I'll probably still upload it anyway just to have some content. And if you don't hear from me before the new Kendrick Lamar album drops, it is going to be one of the more challenging records to cover because of the mystique that has surrounded Kendrick. So if you're watching this and it's past that time, hit up the blog to see how I even tried to possibly approach that subject. It's still over 2 weeks out, so I really have no idea, but here's hoping it's good. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. The Kendrick fans are going to come at me for saying that it might not be good. If I end up dead, a Kendrick Twitter stan shot me, or Pusha T might have had me murdered for making fun of his name, and that's just the facts.